Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca for my weekly chatty catch up on everything that I read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for about the current week. And I'm also in the midst of doing my mid-month book bash blogging for this weekend. So this is not even going to be everything that I'm reading currently. But let's dive into the stuff I finished already earlier this week. Number one is Half an Inch of Water by Percival Everett. I enjoyed this so much. This is a collection of short stories that are kind of nebulously set in the American West. I assumed this was going to be more historical, and it is not. This seems to be all contemporary to me. I felt like going through this collection, none of the actual stories stood out to me completely. There was not a plot that really appealed to me, so that was the weakest part. But the craftsmanship of the writing definitely stood out. The characters feel so believable and complex, not very likable most of the time, and the sense of place and setting, even though I don't know where exactly the setting is, it seemed like all of these are probably set in a shared community somewhere in roughly Wyoming or thereabouts. And that sense of place, you get the vastness of the wilderness there, you get the extremes of the hot desert in summer and the cold piles of snow in winter where it's unsafe to get around. And you also very much get the sense of rural life and community, for both good and ill. I think I wanted more critique of that included here, and this was not interested in engaging with that topic. So this was more straightforward and not a lot of message-focused stories, I would say. There was a little bit there, but not very much. So overall, I really thought this was fantastic. And I think that for me, one of the best stories that I enjoyed the most, it has a very weird premise that begins very, very mundanely and progresses with a growing sense of dread. And then something happens that just is so absurd and completely turns things on their head. For me, that was my favorite story from this collection. And it made me excited because I think that dynamic and the flow of the storytelling sounds very similar to the comedy and absurdity a bit, as well as dread, that's layered for the book Trees. From everything I've heard about that from other people, it sounds like that's the same vibe. And I've wanted to get to that one for quite a while. It's on my big list of new releases-ish to get to, even though it's a couple of years old now. But that one I think is now very high up on my list because I enjoyed this so much in terms of the writing, and the vibe of my favorite story here seems to line up a lot with Trees. So that is Half an Inch of Water. Then I read the big chunky one that I've had in progress, Wicked, by Gregory Maguire. This is the first in his retellings of the Oz stories. In this book, we are following primarily Elphaba, who is the person that turns out to be the Wicked Witch of the Oz stories. But this is all about looking at her from a different perspective and seeing her with more empathy and what was going on in the world at the time, right? So there's a ton of world building in this, and I love that. I think that's my favorite part of this, is all the world building and history and backstory, and there's a big religious element. So I wanted even more about the Unionists and the Lurlenists of the different religions, whatever. But this book is completely unhinged. Such a strange book. And it sort of throws in everything and the kitchen sink to storytelling, where there are so many tangents across the story, and virtually everything that we set out to do in the story falters and it doesn't progress forward, and so we're off on some other escapade. It's really wild. This is also so very different from the play. It's not even that the play is like a bullet points version of this at all. This is a totally different story. There are the seeds there. I think the closest to directly copied from the book to the play is the story of, or the backstory of Elphaba before she was born. Like how did she come to be? What went on with her parents and that stuff all seems to be pretty accurate to what's in the book. So I liked that this had so much more world building. We run through, even just the first section is only before she's born up to when she's a toddler. And we learn a lot more in the back half, in fact, about her childhood and her family. But she is born to a mother who was kind of well off and is in lineage for ruling, but didn't want any of the responsibility and kind of just fell in love with the first guy to show her interest, to get her out of her family. And that guy is a pretty extreme conservative minister who is attempting to evangelize, more or less. This does not have real world religions, and I was fascinated by the religions here, the Unionists and the Lurlenists, very different types of belief. And there is this whole idea of the pleasure faith. I couldn't tell if that's just conceptual or if that was actually a religion entirely. But regardless, her father is traveling around preaching against that. He's for extreme self-denial. And meanwhile, his wife is pretty much the opposite of that. She's kind of a trophy bride who's now been forced to live in very rural, really out of the way place that she feels isolated and lonely. And so she is constantly taking drugs and having affairs. And that's pretty much where we start out from. And it just goes even more haywire from there. So I don't even know how much to talk about in terms of the story. The story goes all over the place for Elphaba. And like I said, it doesn't even follow close to what the play contains. We follow her to Shiz, which is kind of the university, and that's where she comes to understand and connect with the plight of capital A animals. And I think that's a big element of this story, is her empathy and her efforts to fight in resistance for the rights of other people that are being taken away. And it seems like she's the only person in this book who has empathy. That's part of what I think this is hitting the reader over the head with in terms of messaging, because we are getting this really strong narrative about that. Even down to the world is so siloed racially or ethnically. So that's very overt. But when they show up at the Shiz, this university, in part 2, really, like, immediately everyone starts introducing each other in, or getting perceptions of each other based on their appearance and who they are racially or ethnically. And Elphaba is the only one who sees a problem with that, and it's like, I don't want to be judged by, as my whole identity is my appearance outwardly, or my race or ethnicity. And so there's this great commentary there of her being the only one who even sees the problem. Everyone else is making these very rash and frequently unkind judgments toward each other, and they don't even recognize how crappy that is, or that any of them could be different. So that's part of what's great and part of what's lacking in nuance here. I think that the lack of nuance is very intentional. For me, this book really manages well to be both a satire and a pastiche. The pastiche, clearly he has a passion for the original story, the Oz stories, given that he's written a whole host of books in this world, like 4 in the main series and then I think little asides. He clearly loves the world and is expanding a world that he loves. But also he is hitting the reader over the head with a lot of real world messaging here that's the satire. And he's using the framework of this story to get there. So I liked the messaging, but yeah, it is very heavy-handed. And I can see why people would absolutely not like this because of the heavy-handed messaging. I can also see why people would not like this because, as I said up front, it is an unhinged book. There is a lot of like sexual content, there's some violent content in here, and it doesn't all totally make sense. And Elphaba's path is so long and winding. There's no one goal for her. She changes goals frequently throughout this story, and this is covering such a span of time. She's got to be in her 40s by the end of the book, I think. So it doesn't happen in the condensed manner that I think the other stories about her have been. So we're following a huge amount more expansion about who she is, about the mundane things in her life. The relationship that is prominent to the play is not in any way similar. As I think we all know, the story taking the original story and flipping the perspective on its head a bit to show the normalization of evil, or the banality of evil a bit here. I think this is so successful in that because of all of the buildup that we get the long form story of Oz taking over, kicking out the child regent from the throne, and becoming this very fascist, controlling authoritarian, right? And putting in place all of these rules that very much delineate sort of tribalism and put people in their place and don't allow for any difference. And the animals specifically, these are sentient humanoid animals, are very much the main target because of their overt difference. And it's fascinating to see that play out, but also that plays out very early in the book. And from then on, we just see it completely normalized into society, where people aren't even thinking about the fact that it has changed over their lifetimes, and that talking animals being in their farmyard and treated as part of their owned property is just totally integrated into society and normalized. The harms and cruelties to those animal people is very, very difficult to see at times. It's really gruesome. And we do have a very on-page lynching, in fact. And I think that this is so strong because it does that, and we get the room to breathe in this book of showing that long, expansive journey over the course of her lifetime. At points, she is involved with resistance movements. At other points, she's not. She's just off on these whims of her own. And so the journey to get her to where she's going is so rambling, but I totally enjoyed this. I thought this was really fantastic, and I definitely intend to continue on with the series. So that's everything that I finished this week. What I have in progress, other than the mid-month book bash stuff, is still Mossflower by Brian Jacks. I made it about a third of the way through this, and it's kind of getting paused because I need to make some progress in a long, chunky one. This is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I did decide I want to start from the beginning and reread Ninth House before going into Hellbent, the sequel. So I will be progressing with that, and I have 4 things going for mid-month book bash that you will see this week, hopefully, if I edit the vlog. So onward to watching, I guess. This week I watched one thing, or I finished watching one thing, and it was The Amazing Maurice, which is adapted from an original juvenile story in the Discworld by Terry Pratchett. And as with most things like this, you have to kind of go in separating the original from the adaptation, and I think that's very well advised here. It does not live up to the quality of a Terry Pratchett novel, in my opinion. It's definitely not the best adaptation, but it's really enjoyable. I had a great time with it. It's very entertaining, and it's just a good family film. Plus it has kind of glimmers of those Pratchettisms to it. So it was a great time. I really liked watching it. I think a standout within the show, this is an animated feature, the voices for Dangerous Fiends, David Tennant was fantastic, absolutely perfect. And Peter Serafinowicz as Death was very, very good. Not the best Death I've seen in the adaptations, but very, very excellent. So I think that's all for what I watched this week. Onward to life. And this is the part I've been dreading getting to. I've not wanted to film today because a lot has happened in the world today, or the past 24 hours. So there was an attempt on the life of Trump yesterday night at one of his rallies, and there's just a lot swirling around, and I've been doom scrolling like probably most people over the past 24 hours. I was up much too late looking at everything and seeing what's going on, but also at the same time I want to talk about it because there is so much misinformation and just speculation and rumor going around, and in the first 24 hours after this, that is about all that's going to be happening, is people just desperately flinging anything at the wall, trying to get their information out, whether it's valid or not, as quickly as they can to try and profit off of it. And that's gross, but of course it's impossible to completely stay out of trying to keep up with what's happening, because this is such a major turning point and moment that certainly will have effects going forward in the coming week. But what I most want to say, other than I think within BookTube, we have a very reasonable group who can all discuss things and varied topics, whether we agree or not. And I think that I know that people that I'm connected with here, or people who watch, are not all from one end of the political spectrum, and may in fact be across the spectrum. So if you are hearing rumors and you are feeling that there is a nebulous they out there who are the left, and there's so much negativity coming through about that, or conspiracy theories about the left having in any way encouraged this, I would say look at what you can put a face to. Not just nebulous they out in the ether, not potentially bots or trolls or astroturfing on the internet, but something you can actually identify people, real people, saying. And if you don't have a person or people in your life that are that face, like I can put myself as a face toward that. I think probably most people who watch me know I'm fairly far left, pretty extreme left, and the majority of my friends probably also are on the more extreme end of left. And so I fit into that category that there's a lot of fear mongering about right this moment that I haven't even checked up with in the last several hours, so it's probably gotten even worse. But legitimately, no one I know or myself in any way agrees with, supports, or is even cheering on what has happened in any way. Every person that I know only views this as something that has made the looming dread about the state of our country, the division and rhetoric surrounding the politics in our country, is only going to be impacted for the worse. So no one I know is cheering this on or in any way condones this. You cannot fight evil with evil. It doesn't somehow transmogrify into good, and violence, regardless of any way that this person could have twisted themselves into a pretzel to justify it, does not make it okay or acceptable in any scenario. I think myself and my friends certainly want to see Trump face justice, but within the legal system, with even the extra protections that he receives from the legal system as a result of his political status. I think that all of us want to see that, and having that denied is wrong, is not the right way forward for anyone, nor does anyone want to see that. I'm sure there are people out there, but they are the nut jobs on both sides. The people who are cheering are not representative of any side or any part of the spectrum, but insanity. And I think, I know that I personally am going to be looking at things very, very critically and taking everything that I hear with a grain of salt. For right now, within the first 24 hours, I'm basically assuming everything is unverified and just treating it that way until we get some really, really hard information. So just go in with your eyes wide open. Don't trust everything you hear, and don't let those in power exploit this situation to gain more power by dividing and spreading rumors or spreading rhetoric that is tribalistic and divisive. All we can do to get through what is facing our country right now and the level of division is having empathy for one another and trying to see things through each other's shoes. So I think that's where I will leave that, at least for now. I have no idea if I will leave it in, but I don't know how to get through today without saying something at least about it, because it is just overwhelming. And it's been another hard week for me, just very minor stuff. So I'm going to focus on the minor stuff right now because everything else is just too much. There's been other big things, but I can't talk about, or I'm not going to talk about here. In the positive column, let's start with the positive column for this week for me. The couch finally came. It sounds so silly that I've been bringing it up and it's been like this whole saga, but it's one of the positives that I can hold on to right now. It came, it was delivered very quickly, and everything went completely smooth, and it is fantastic. I'm so happy I held out for a couch that I really liked, and I didn't just try to get one to fill the space. So it has been great. You'll get to see some footage in the blog for this weekend of cats getting used to it. They already have claimed it as their own. I guess in the less positive personal column is that they finished doing the road work last week, and I thought everything was going to mellow out, but there were still some holes in my yard, and as it turns out, that has gotten significantly worse. There are now many, many more holes in the yard, and they are basically rerunning all the electrical outside because I guess the road work uncovered or possibly caused some problems with all of the utilities. So I've had utility workers out with machinery in my yard around the clock. Basically, it seems like it's been like 10 or 12 hours a day, except for when the heat has been extreme. All week, very loud banging noise. They had a ditch witch out there, which is a big machinery that, I don't know, pulls things. So Yeah, that, and he needed me to move my car because I need to get things into my driveway to go through. And yeah, it's been very interesting around here, and it just feels very strange. So everything was a little overwhelming, and it was very appropriate to this week that the lawn care guys came this week and accidentally, I assume, chopped down my hibiscuses. So I had two lovely full-grown hibiscuses that were about ready to start blooming. They were covered with buds and they were just gone. So I walked out to get my mail. My yard is all torn up. I see the hibiscuses have just disappeared and been left. There's just a stem there. And I very nearly started crying. It was just too much this week, really. But I am still feeling generally okay. Maybe I've disconnected from reality at this point. It was definitely an emotional, like, breaking moment for me where I couldn't help but laugh and want to cry. There is this perfect Heart and Brain comic. The author of the comic, it's a long-running comic, and there's also the Awkward Yeti, which is really great. But Heart and Brain are the two sides of us as thinking or feeling people, really. And Heart is always very emotive. So Heart has all of these things on his back and is very emotional about all the things that are on his back and everything. And then encounters a very minor step. And obviously with all the things on his back, it's really difficult, and he just trips and starts crying. And it's like, this is just too much. If one more thing is just too many. This minor inconvenience is one step too far. And Brain's like, I think you're probably overreacting. And that's true, but also that's exactly how I was feeling about the hibiscuses, where it was like this one little thing was the last straw. So that was my week. And it has only moved forward toward being even worse right now. So the general dread about everything in the world is a lot for, I think, many, many of us on BookTube. Keeping the love of reading and the joy of books, the empathy that they bring us, and the connectedness of this community at the front of my mind is the only way that I can keep moving forward in a positive and optimistic way for myself right now, at least. Yeah, there's just a lot. So I think that is all for me to, actually, no, I lied. The most obvious, I completely forgot. So I obviously got my next round of Invisalign treatment, and I am wearing my Invisaligns right now. Because we have much shortened the window between switching them out, so you have to switch them out constantly so that they change in steps, basically. And we have greatly shortened that window, so it's going to cut like 6 or 8 weeks off of my treatment time for this round, which is fantastic. But that means I'm going to have to be wearing them all of the time. I've been very good about that up till this round, so as long as I can keep that up, that's why I was able to shorten the windows there. So that means I'm going to be wearing them during filming a lot now. I've been taking them out recently because I've been on retainer, so I don't have to wear them a ton. But I'm not going to be able to do that. So that will be a noticeable difference, possibly. It may be a little more lispy than usual, but it is what it is. Hopefully it will be done in a couple of months if, in fact, this winds up being my last round. So I think that really is all there is for me today. I hope that you are maintaining hopefulness and positivity and connection with others going into whatever this coming week holds for us. Thank you so very much for watching.